King John's reign was an utter catastrophe. This cruel, twisted tyrant watched as his once powerful empire went up in flames around him, while he alienated every single person who ever called him an ally. It's fitting, then, that when this maniac's end finally came, it was absolutely gruesome. Most people think of King John as the sniveling usurper who plagued Robin Hood, but the real man was far more complicated. Born a forgotten fourth son to King Henry II, the wily and cunning John played his family against each other until he was the only one left. But while John knew how to take a throne, he didn't know what to do with it once he had it, and his reign was one of the most disastrous in England's history. When John was born, his father, King Henry II, ruled over the Angevin Empire, which included England and nearly half of France. John's mother and father might have been two of the most powerful people in Europe, but that didn't make them good parents. His mother, the infamous Eleanor of Aquitaine, was far too busy conspiring against her equally absent husband to spend any time with her son. John was his parents' fourth son. While their older boys, Henry, Richard, and Geoffrey, stood to inherit great fortunes, there wasn't going to be much left for the runt of the litter. John wasn't supposed to inherit anything, but he had one thing going for him. He came from one of the most toxic, dysfunctional families in history. King Henry didn't really trust his three older sons, and he refused to grant them any real power over the empire. As each of them grew older, they chafed under his restrictions. By the time John was a boy, the Angevin Empire was a den of infighting, backstabbing, and sometimes even open conflict. Henry still gave young John control over several powerful castles across France, and one person in particular was absolutely furious about it. King Henry had already promised said castles to John's older brother, Henry, the young king. King Henry, who wanted more power and feared that their father would give even more of his lands to John, revolted against his father. And he wasn't alone. John's mother, Eleanor, didn't like her husband sticking his nose where it didn't belong, i.e., Aquitaine. So she pushed John's other brothers to join forces with the young king against their father. The family was in complete disarray, but no one had more to gain than John. He was right at his father's side, the final remaining loyal son. The longer the rebellion dragged on, the more lands Henry II gave to John, mostly by ripping them away from various bitter nobles. The Earl of Gloucester was one of the richest men in England, and he planned to split up his lands among his many daughters. Henry had other ideas. He disinherited all of the Earl's daughters except for one, Isabella. Then he betrothed John to Isabella, setting him up to become one of the richest men in the empire. Not only were John and Isabella children at the time, but the two of them were related through their great-grandfather, King Henry III. That was close enough that their marriage should have been illegal based on consanguinity. The Archbishop of Canterbury certainly thought so, and he banned the two cousins from marrying. Henry VI took his case straight to the Pope, and he agreed to allow John and Isabella to marry under one condition. They weren't allowed to sleep together. John was the medieval equivalent of a spoiled millionaire's son. He adored books and even maintained an incredibly expensive library to travel around with him. That was nothing compared to his extensive collection of jewels and his wardrobe full of the finest clothes money could buy. All of this sounds fairly normal, if a little eccentric, but anyone who knew him quickly realized there was something off about John. His mood swings could break the sound barrier. He was extremely touchy, incredibly jealous, and prone to sudden and violent fits of rage. Without an outlet for his anger, many noted that he would often gnaw on his own fingers in blind rage. However, beneath the fine clothes and wild mood swings lay a cunning and ruthless mind, and that made John extremely dangerous. The constant infighting that haunted John's family soon claimed its first victim. John's oldest brother, Henry the young king, started a war with the middle brother, Richard, over one slight or another. but he bit off more than he could chew. The conflict accomplished basically nothing, and all Henry got out of it was an agonizing demise from dysentery. With the primary heir to Henry II's empire gone, everyone moved up in the world. Henry made Richard the King of England and gave John Richard's old territory of Aquitaine. Richard wasn't going to give up a territory as rich as Aquitaine that easily, so he dug in his heels and refused to budge. Furious, Henry ordered John and his other brother, Geoffrey, to gather a force and take the duchy from Richard by any means necessary. John and Geoffrey stormed the capital at Poitiers, so Richard responded by attacking Geoffrey's territory in Brittany. This family was a total mess, but after years of scheming and fighting, they were finally getting sick of it. The conflict reached a stalemate, and the whole family met up in England to call a truce. Richard ended up keeping Aquitaine, but John, now a temperamental teenager, got his first taste of real power, and he liked it. Henry II still wanted to get some serious land for his favorite son, so why not Ireland? He sent John and a large entourage to the Emerald Isle to start running things there. Finally, John actually had real power, and he completely screwed it all up. It's hard to imagine John doing a worse job in Ireland. To be fair, he had his work cut out for him. The Angevins had only recently conquered the island, and the Irish still weren't exactly happy about it. It was going to take a delicate hand to secure control of Ireland, and John was more like a bull in a china shop. John lasted a year in Ireland. In that time, he managed to anger the locals, alienate pretty much all his Angevin allies, and lose a bunch of ground to Irish rebels. He eventually slunk back to England with his tail between his legs, placing all the blame on his viceroy, Hugh Delassie. And this was just the beginning of a lifetime of failures. Henry II grew old and weak, and John's brother Richard saw blood in the water. He allied with Philip II, the King of France, and declared war on his stumbling father. In a shocking twist after a lifetime as his father's lapdog, John actually turned coat and sided with Richard. Henry II had no fight left in him. He waved the white flag, acceded to Richard's demands, and died soon after. Richard became the new king, and he had only one thing on his mind: the Crusades. He desperately wanted to fight the Holy War in the Middle East, but he knew that was risky. He'd spent his entire life squabbling with his parents and brothers over the Angevin Empire, so he realized someone might take it as soon as he left. To buy John's loyalty, Richard showered him with valuable territories in Cornwall, Devon, Somerset, and Nottingham. He hoped that with all that wealth, John would just sit by and watch over the empire in Richard's name, while his lion-hearted brother fought Saracens in the Holy Land. Richard named his 4-year-old nephew Arthur heir to the empire, and forced John to promise not to step foot in England for 3 years. The way he saw it, that gave him plenty of time to go off, crusade to his heart's content, then come back to reclaim his throne. John happily agreed. He would never dare try to usurp his brother's throne. It didn't take long for John to get to work. He knew that the people of England were unhappy with Richard's rule thus far, and he saw his chance to strike. First, he convinced his mother Eleanor to persuade Richard to let him back into England. Richard relented, and John quickly crossed the Channel, establishing himself at the royal court. The years began to pass, and yet still Richard, the supposed King of England, remained nowhere to be found. Pretty soon people in England began to see John as their de facto ruler, perhaps even the next king. John started spreading rumors that Richard had been killed on his crusade. Richard was still very much alive, and actually had begun his trip back to England after years abroad. Unfortunately, Duke Leopold of Austria had captured him en route and handed him over to the unscrupulous Henry VI, Holy Roman Emperor. This was the best opportunity John was ever going to get, so he went all in. In England, the lines had been drawn. There were those who supported Richard and those who backed John. With the sides chosen, fighting broke out, and it turned ugly. Even with Richard in captivity, John just couldn't gain a foothold against the forces loyal to his brother. By the time Richard escaped his bondage and limped back to England, John had accomplished nothing. His forces surrendered pretty much the second that Richard stepped foot on English soil. John ran away to Normandy and tried to lay low, hoping his brother would forget about the whole treachery thing. Richard, of course, caught up to him before long, yet his response to John's betrayal surprised everyone. Apparently, Richard the Lionheart, the fierce Crusader king, was a big softy deep down. He forgave his 27-year-old brother, saying he was only a child who has had evil counselors. After his laughable failed coup, John bided his time and waited for his next chance to strike. That chance came when Richard took a crossbow bolt to the shoulder. The wound soon festered, and the warrior king quickly faded away. He died in 1199, leaving a power vacuum behind. The succession crisis after Richard's passing was a complete mess. There were two claimants to the throne, John and his nephew Arthur, still a young boy. To make matters worse, Norman law favored John, while Angevin law favored Arthur. Within a matter of months, the crisis broke out into open conflict. John had already made one deal with the devil, so why not do it again? He negotiated a peace with King Philip of France not long after Richard's death. In the treaty, Philip recognized John as Richard's heir, while John accepted Philip as the feudal overlord of his territories in France. John's weak diplomacy disgusted the Normans, who took to calling the new king John's soft sword for his craven deal. Just when you think he can't get any worse, John set his sights on replacing his wife. And in keeping with medieval history's tendency to feature several characters with the same name, his new love interest was also named Isabella. Though we don't know exactly how old Isabella of Angoulême was when she married John, contemporary chroniclers noted that she was too young even for the time, so we know she was young. Isabella was already engaged to someone else, the powerful Hugh IX of Lusignan, who just so happened to be a political rival of John's. Hugh wasn't about to take John's treachery lying down. He took his case straight to King Philip of France, who ordered John to come to Paris to make amends. John, who never liked being told what to do, said no and stayed put with his child bride. Philip must have been fed up with John's nonsense because he decided to bring the hammer down. He revoked John's claim to all of his territories on the continent, including his ancestral home of Normandy. King John now found himself at war once again, fighting for his birthright, all because he wanted to marry one particular young girl. John's nephew Arthur was still kicking around, a rival claimant to the Angevin throne, so he decided to take him out of the equation. He had his nephew captured, locked him up, and threw away the key. No one ever saw Arthur again, and modern historians believe he was eventually killed by John and his body thrown into the Seine. In 1204, John received devastating news. His mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, had died. Her steely grip on Aquitaine was essential to his rule. King Philip went for the jugular. In one fell swoop, he invaded and claimed Normandy, Anjou, and Poitou. Now all that remained of the once formidable Angevin Empire was England and Aquitaine. John's empire was falling apart. Philip defeated his force, and John had to sign a humiliating peace treaty, putting the final nail in the coffin of his hopes of regaining his territory. But once he made it back to England, things went from bad to worse. Rebel barons, well and truly fed up with the tyrannical King John, raised a force of their own and marched on London. They easily took the city, and several nobles loyal to John betrayed him and joined forces with the rebels. Completely out of options, John had to wave the white flag and sign one of the most humiliating deals in the history of England. The barons forced John to sign the Magna Carta, which completely hamstrung his power and gave the barons untold freedom. Signing such a deal should have been rock bottom for the miserable King John, and yet, no. While the Magna Carta is one of the most infamous charters in history, it didn't actually accomplish much. Neither John nor the barons abided by it, and it was only a matter of time before they ripped it up and decided to settle things the old-fashioned way. The rebels gathered a new army and planned to oust John by force. In a shocking move, they even invited the French Prince Louis to lead them. Even a French king would be better than King John at this point. The First Barons' War was a miserable end to a miserable reign. The two sides fought each other to a stalemate that showed little sign of letting up. Stubborn John still insisted on leading his men from the front lines, and that eventually proved fatal. He contracted dysentery, yet still he trudged on through the countryside, determined to deal with the rebel barons once and for all. Dysentery is an extremely gruesome way to go, so it was a fitting end to John's horrible reign. He managed to limp into Newark Castle in Nottinghamshire before his body finally gave out. He died in October 1216, just over a year after he put his pen to the Magna Carta. For the final decade of his reign, King John had kept his own niece, Eleanor, rotting in a cell. She technically had a claim to his throne, so he kept her locked up so she couldn't rise up against him. In a final act of spite, John amended his will to state that she never be released from captivity. That's just the kind of man King John was. Today, history remembers him as one of the most despised monarchs England has ever seen, a title that he truly earned. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to Keep Exploring with Us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Lactonate, for more incredible facts about everything.